Okay, so our next presenters come from Indonesia, Irene and Christian. Thanks. So, yeah, please have, yes, maybe that the two sit together.
Good evening, everyone. We would like to thank you for still being here until the very last of this session. My name is Christian.
And my name is Irene Noviyani. Both of us.
Mike.
Yes.
My name is Irene Noviyani. Both of us are accountants who learn safeguarding issue through real-life experience.
We are going to share our paper titled An Internal Control Lens on Safeguarding, a Survivor Accountant Perspective on Transparency, Accountability, and Compliance in Intercultural Church Context.
Abuse cases are more than moral failures. They are governance failures. This study shifts the focus to an audit-style international control framework. The main objective is to demonstrate how safeguarding failures in intercultural contexts often follow patterns familiar in weak church governance systems, such as absence of documentation trails, unclear responsibility ownership, conflict of interest in internal investigation, and inconsistent compliance with external legal standards. The project asks, how can safeguarding be strengthened when viewed through internal control logic rather than purely pastoral or disciplinary lens? Drawing on the author background in accounting and governance controls, the study reframes safeguarding through three fundamental principles: transparency, accountability, and compliance using an audit-style control framework. Methodology. This study used a qualitative longitudinal analysis of multi-year survivor case journey involving multiple church authorities, different countries, and cultural layers. The experience is mapped into a map safeguarding control matrix similar to audit and risk control frameworks, identifying control objective, risk indicators, control failures, and required corrective safeguards. Intercultural factors, including clericalism, hierarchy, reputation protection culture, and cross-border jurisdiction are analyzed as systemic risk multipliers. This is the survivor case timeline as a background of this paper that began in 2014, and the reporting process still ongoing until now. Between 2014 and 2016, the events occurred, and the survivor first reported the case to an international public association based in France, of which the perpetrator was a member of that association. as well as to the diocese in Indonesia under whose jurisdiction the perpetrator was registered. And in 2018, the perpetrator had been dismissed from the International Public Association based in France, and the case was transferred to a diocese in Indonesia. In 2019, the survivor was finally able to contact the bishop of the diocese under whose the perpetrator's jurisdiction was registered to inquire about the progress of the investigation. However, the bishop subsequently ceased communication with the survivor, leaving her uninformed about the status of the case. Then, during this period of limited transparency, it becomes known that the perpetrator had allegedly manipulated several other women victims. The survivor then appointed a civil lawyer, and because she resided in another diocese, also reported the case to the bishop of her local diocese on her own initiative. Then in 2020, her bishop advised the survivor to submit a report to the Apostolic Nunciature in Indonesia rather than pursue the matter through a civil lawyer. Unfortunately, the Apostolic Nunciature never responded to the responded letter. The bishop who had been the leader of the perpetrators' diocese passed away in 2023, and in 2024, when Pope Francis visited Indonesia, the survivor had opportunity to write a letter to him regarding the case. And in 2025, the survivor was interviewed by the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. Subsequently, the new bishop, who had succeeded the late bishop, informed the survivor that there were no record or no archives relating to her case or any investigation of it. Then, most recently, finally, Missio from Aachen, Germany, supported the survivor by commissioning a canon lawyer to review the handling of the case entirely. Okay. This is the summary of the survivor case timeline.
And now let's take a look at the internal control concept and framework as applied to Let's see it from the framework of internal control applied to the survivor's case. So if this conference was started by a pizza, so let's now see the analogy of pizza. Let's say we have an objective to make a delicious pizza. So we have an objective. And then secondly, we have ingredients of pizza, which are flour, olive oil, and etc. And then thirdly, we have parts of pizza. We have the toppings and the bottom and so on. So in COSO cube, we also have 3 dimensions. At the top, we have the objectives to make delicious pizza, which are operations objectives, reporting objectives, and compliance objectives. And then at the front, we have 5 ingredients of pizzas, which are control environment, risk assessment, and so on. And then on the right dimension, we have the part of pizzas, which are entity level, division, and so on. So now let's see the objectives first. In operation objectives, the main issues are about effectiveness and efficiency of entities' operations, including safeguarding of assets. And if we reflect to the survivor's case, we could see that there was poor safeguarding of congregation members in the church operations. In the reporting objectives, we could see that there was no transparency for years to some stakeholders of the church. In compliance of objectives, we could see that there was no compliance to Vos Estis Lux Mundi, as there was no written safeguarding protocol in the diocese of the survivors. And then let's see the internal control components of and applied to the survivor's case. Control environment is about the commitment to integrity and ethical values, about independence to oversight internal control. But if we see in the survivor's case, there was no independence when clergy investigates clergy cases because there was conflict of interest. And then secondly, there's risk assessment. Thirdly, the component is about control activities. It is about policies and procedures to mitigate risk to the achievement of objectives. But in the survivor's case, we could see that there's no clear safeguarding protocols in the diocese. And then information and communication, we could see in the case that there was no case archives. The history of the case was missing in action. And then about monitoring activities are concerned with evaluation used to ascertain whether each of the 5 components of internal control are present and functioning. But we could see that without goodwill, knowledge, and control framework, it is impossible to implement safeguarding in the dioceses and in the church. And in internal organization level, in the case, we could see that internal control mechanisms within the church, if any, were poorly implemented, both at the highest level of authority, which was represented by the Apostolic Nunciature in Indonesia, and at the diocesan level. And besides the internal control weaknesses, the survivor also realized that there were systemic and intercultural risk multipliers that make the case worsen. And they are clericalism, secrecy, and complexity. And there are some safeguarding impacts because of the case. Firstly, because of the lack of transparency, there was loss of survivor trust to the church. Because of lack of accountability, there was delayed justice and more victims fell. And because of lack of compliance, there was systemic breach of universal standards. And this is parts of the letters of the survivor to the Holy Father, Father Francis, Pope Francis.
And according to legal and canon law review on this entire case, there have been punishable acts of sexual violation and denial of the survivor right to information. After conducting a comprehensive analysis of this case, the following are strategic recommendations that the author can offer. First, involving audit and compliance professionals from lay people. The second, unifying minimum standard for intercultural case handling. The third, implementing internal control frameworks. And the fourth, involving survivor in assessing system effectiveness. Then, the path that we need to see forward is the transition from a clerical discretion model to verifiable governance model, restoring the wounded lamb's true truth. Ensuring transparency is the institutional default, upholding justice as the measure of health. Then, that is what we can share with you this evening. Thank you for listening us.
Thank you very much, Irene and Christian, for this very concrete example how difficult a reporting process can be. Okay, we have now some time. We will not do it too long for some questions. So you may address the two from Indonesia or Father Sylvester. Please be precise and short in your questions.
Good afternoon, Francisco Cardenas from the United States. Thank you, Irene, for your presentation. My question is directed at you. Based on your presentation and the process that you planned out and described for all of us, would you think that the presence of leadership and authority in conversations like this is paramount to implement what you just proposed? So in other words, having the more presence of decision makers within the Catholic Church present here?
So actually, we are not safeguarders. We learn safeguarding through life experience. So we are sorry if our answer is not fully correct, but I think from our understanding, leadership is very important in safeguarding, because for example, if the leader is this high, then safeguarding can go this high. But if the leader has increased her leadership this high, the safeguarding can go as high as the leadership level. That's what my understanding.
Thank you very much. I see a hand here, left. The lady in the green. What, was that a hand? Please show clearly. No, was not a hand. Okay, okay. Okay, I see here 1, 2. First here in the middle, and then we go.
One is to Father, sorry, I forget your name. Okay. When you mentioned that, there are new trends and global trends to make these more imminent. What do you mean? Because you don't have enough time to explain. And then the other question to two of you. I realized that in Indonesia, the Catholic population is very small and not very large. And when you explain the culture, you mentioned that the clergy, the security, I think sometimes, the Asian, East Asian country and South Asia share the similar situation because we are so small, so they want to pretend we are very purified. Our Catholic Church, the faith is really, much more intelligent or whatever, so than other religions. So most of the culture, the lay people and the priesthood just try to cover. These are typical mentality or social psychology maintained in the Catholic Church. So do you notice the similar, as I felt in my country? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. I will be very short. You know that there's any policy that's eternal. Periodically, we have to review policy. Why? Because culture is static and moving. We have to go to the background of our family backgrounds, where people were born, and to today. Check. Our families is not the same. Safeguarding last year is not the same today. Things are changing. The war of Iran, inflation everywhere in the world, we have been affected. COVID, we have been affected. Things are changing. COVID, we learned from COVID that even from the house, you can work. Before, we had to gather to work. But COVID taught us a lot. So things are moving. Therefore, cultures is moving. The static and moving. And the policies also have to be adapted to culture. That's why there's no policy that's eternal. Periodically, you have to review policy. Yeah. Thank you. Are you satisfied?
We go to the question up there in the last line.
Thank you very much, Father Sylvester, for your presentation. My name is Nuhu Bala. I'm a student of the IADC and also from Nigeria. I believe the presentation on effectiveness of interculturality, of safeguarding through its principle of accountability, transparency and compliance should come from maybe context somewhere around Sierra Leone. I'm a bit concerned from my own side. I do not know more about Sierra Leonean culture, but in my own context, we have the problem of contextual multiculturality. Now, I give you an example. We celebrate Mass. For instance, I wake up to celebrate Mass on Sunday morning. I'm thinking on how to celebrate 3 Masses in 3 different languages. How does that help me, for instance, to interpret the culture of the people in my policy, in what I do in safeguarding? So in this, how does, multiculturality affect these principles of compliance, transparency, and accountability? Thank you.
Multicultural safeguarding affects principles. I just said that we live in a world where everything is changing. In the beginning, I said that there's no culture that is static. Therefore, every society which does not take into account the diversity of culture, you can't be successful when you come. Peter just presented something very nice this evening. How one way of thinking can't be successful, can't liberate people. We need to bring together many ways. It does not mean that we accept any kind of standard, but your way of thinking has to be criticized when it enters into contact another culture. So you have to listen. Sister said this morning, Joseph, you have to listen. Where you go, you have to listen to others. Why? You just go with your own way of thinking that they should change by force. No. You have to be creative also in the matter of liturgy, you talk about liturgy, you have to be creative. It does not mean that people, the way of thinking, people love the culture. Culture defines society. Where you go, you have to listen to the culture. And Sister said this morning, you have to create new mechanism to see how to improve what is there. No culture is perfect. So safeguarding, when we go there, we have to see what is in the ground, listen to that culture, and improve it. It's another way of incorporation. Yeah.
One, two, and then we will slowly also come to a close.
I am Agnes from the Philippines and a student here. Mine is not a question, but a deep and sincere appreciation to Irene and Christian. Although you were saying that you are not much of the background of safeguarding, but I sincerely appreciate you for giving us a clear example and process of how organizations become contributors to victimizations. What I'm trying to say is we are learning that vulnerance, the capacity of organization to contribute to the victimizations, you have given us a clear example and the how-to in addressing it. Thank you very much for that.
Last question.
Hello, I'm Sarah Gladwell from the UK. Thank you to all three speakers. My question is to Irene and to Christian, our colleagues from Indonesia. The kind of scenario that you described with the survivors' barriers to transparency, I was wondering if you could say a little more around the emotional impact from your experience on survivors who experience these kind of barriers, and I'm thinking particularly around the idea of re-traumatization.
Can you please repeat?
Sorry, there's a bit echo, sorry.
Of course, I'm thinking about the emotional impact on a survivor who experiences such barriers to transparency that you described. I'm thinking about re-traumatization of survivors for whom it is so difficult to get answers from the church.
Yes, I have a lot emotional impacts from the beginning, but because of this is a long process journey, finally I got like normal. I think normal because I have to face this situation, and because I'm thinking if I trapped in the emotional zone, I cannot move on. And that's why I'm trying to analyze the process and then learn about the safeguarding. Basically, in 2020, when the bishop asked me to drop the civil lawyer, I asked him about the procedure. But I don't know at the time that the name is safeguarding. I don't know. But until now, unfortunately, the safeguarding, what he promised, I never seen the procedure. I just want to know the procedure because I feel as a survivor, I come to the church authority and then move to another, the another one, A, B, C, D. I was confused. My question is, do I take the wrong step, or do I report to the wrong authority? I don't know. That's why I asked about the procedure. But unfortunately, until this day, I have not yet seen that procedure. Yeah, if the question is emotional, yes. At the beginning, for a few years, I got the emotional tension, and I handled by psychiatry for a few years until I move on for my my negative emotional zone. This is the long process, and until this day, thanks God that I can still stand here. Thank you.
Thank you.
We thank you, Irene, Christian, and Sylvester very much for presenting these realities, which again show us the difficulties, the culture of silence, which is, I guess, part of any culture in any country also, which is driven by different factors. And then coming in the institutional leadership levels, which are not so open for transparency. So thank you very much. I think we have had today a very full day, and you deserve a break now. And at 7 o'clock is